My brother spent 5 years calling me a failure for living in a tiny apartment, until the valet arrived with my Lamborghini and made his smile vanished. I've spent 5 years listening to my family's pity. 5 years of poor Sarah and concerned whispers about my tiny apartment and mysterious job. 5 years of my brother Emery offering to help with my rent while I sat on a fortune that could buy his entire company. They saw what I wanted them to see, a struggling woman in second-hand clothes who took the train because she couldn't afford a car. What they didn't see was the Lamborghini waiting in my garage, the assistant managing my billion-dollar empire, or the fact that their failure of a daughter had been quietly reshaping entire industries while they played their little games of superiority. Tomorrow, when that valet pulls up to their perfect brunch with my car, they'll learn the most important lesson of their privileged lives: never underestimate the quiet one. I never fit in with my family. That's the simple truth I've carried for 32 years, like a stone in my pocket that I forget about until it bruises against my hip. They're the kind of people who measure success by the size of your house and the price of your wine. I'm the kind of person who drinks coffee from a chipped mug and considers it a good day when nobody asks what I do for a living. My name is Sarah, and if you met my family, you'd wonder how we share the same DNA. They're all sharp edges and polished surfaces, while I'm more like driftwood, worn smooth by years of being overlooked, plain enough that people think they can see right through me. They're wrong about that last part, but I've never bothered to correct them. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was watering my single plant, a small succulent that somehow survives despite my tendency to forget it exists. My mother's voice carried that particular tone she uses for family obligations, like she's reading from a script she doesn't quite believe in. "Sarah, honey, it's time for the annual brunch," she said, pausing while I heard her stirring something in the background, probably her morning smoothie with 17 different superfoods that she swears keeps her looking 20 years younger. "Emery is hosting again this year. You know how he loves showing off that house." Emery, my older brother by 4 years, though you'd think it was 40 from the way he talks to me, has the kind of success that photographs well: corner office in Manhattan, magazine perfect wife, twin boys in private school playing lacrosse. Everything about his life screams achievement, while mine whispers uncertainty. Do I have to? I asked, already knowing the answer. The annual family brunch isn't really optional, it's more like a court summons disguised as a social gathering. Of course you do. Your family, she replied, the way she said it making it sound like a medical condition. Besides, it's been a whole year. People want to see how you're doing. People want to see if I'm still failing, she meant, if I'm still the family disappointment, still living in my tiny apartment with second-hand furniture and dreams I keep locked away like embarrassing photographs. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, which is really just an alcove with delusions of grandeur, and stared at the invitation text my mother forwarded. Emery's estate in Maine, 11 sharp, dress code, casual elegance, whatever that means, probably not the jeans and sweater I live in. The thing is, I could dress differently, I could show up in something that costs more than most people's rent, but that would raise questions I'm not ready to answer. And questions are dangerous things in my family, they multiply like rabbits. I walked to my bedroom, 3 steps from the kitchen because that's how small this place is, and looked around at my life. The bed frame I assembled myself with instructions that might as well have been written in ancient Greek, the desk I found on the sidewalk and painted white, the single dresser that holds everything I own, or at least everything I let people think I own. Under the bed, pushed back where dust bunnies go to die, sits a metal box I haven't opened in 3 years. But I know exactly what's inside: documents that would change everything, contracts that would rewrite my family's entire understanding of who I am, numbers that would make their stock portfolios look like pocket change. Opening that box would mean giving up the strange comfort of being underestimated, and there's power in being invisible, in being the person no one expects anything from when you're already written off. Every small victory feels massive. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. Though my family doesn't know I have an assistant, they think the calls I take are from temp agencies. The investor meeting has been moved to after your family thing. You sure you don't want to reschedule? Thompson's been trying to get on your calendar for months. I typed back quickly, no, keep it. I'll be done with the brunch by then. We can do the big reveal at the presentation. Big reveal, even typing it made my stomach flutter. I'd been working toward this moment for years, the unveiling of technology that would change everything. But first, I had to survive Sunday brunch with people who still think I'm one step away from asking for rent money. Growing up, I was always the quiet one. While Emery commanded attention at dinner with stories about his achievements, debate team captain, valedictorian, early admission to Harvard, I sat in the background, picking at my food and wondering if anyone would notice if I just disappeared. They usually didn't. Emery had this way of making everything about him without seeming to try. He'd ask me about school, but before I could answer, he'd be telling some story about his own academic triumphs. He'd compliment my drawings, then immediately launch into detailed explanations of his latest business venture. It wasn't malicious exactly, it was just that in Emery's world, other people existed primarily as an audience for his success. My parents fed into it, of course. Dad would beam with pride when Emery brought home another award. Mom would post pictures on social media with captions about her brilliant son and his bright future. I learned early that the best way to avoid disappointment was to avoid expectations altogether. So I became the family afterthought, the one they invited out of obligation and worried about out of duty. Poor Sarah, still trying to figure out her life. Poor Sarah, with her little apartment and her mystery job that nobody quite understands. Poor Sarah, who shows up to family events looking like she shopped in the clearance section of life. If only they knew. A LinkedIn notification popped up on my phone, and my heart skipped when I saw the name Reza Blackwood. We hadn't spoken in 4 years, not since everything fell apart in the most spectacular way possible. He was messaging me now, after all this time, like a ghost deciding to haunt me right before the most important week of my professional life. Hey Sarah, I know it's been a while. Saw your name mentioned in a tech article recently. Would love to catch up sometime. I've been thinking about the old days a lot lately. The old days when we were broke college students with huge dreams and even bigger plans, when we spent entire nights in the computer lab coding and arguing and building something we were sure would change the world, when I thought I'd found someone who understood that success wasn't always loud and shiny, before he disappeared with our work and left me with nothing but legal bills and trust issues. I stared at the message for a long time before closing the app without responding. Some ghosts deserve to stay buried. The anxiety started building then, the way it always does before family gatherings, that familiar tightness in my chest like someone slowly turning a screw between my ribs. I found myself rehearsing conversations, inventing stories about my life that would be boring enough to avoid follow-up questions but successful enough to avoid pity. I work in consulting, I'd say, tech stuff, pretty niche, nothing too exciting. They'd nod and move on to someone else, someone with a more impressive story to tell. The truth is too complicated, too strange, too unbelievable. How do you explain that you've built an empire in the shadows, that the modest life you live is a choice, not a circumstance, that the person they see as a failure has more money than all of them combined? You don't. You smile and nod and let them think what they want to think. You take the train instead of your car, walk instead of calling a driver, dress down instead of up. You play the part they've written for you because sometimes the truth is too powerful to unleash all at once. The plan was simple: take the commuter train to Maine, walk the 2 miles from the station to Emery's house, arrive looking slightly windblown and apologetic for being late. Let them see exactly what they expected to see: poor Sarah, still struggling, still failing to meet the family standard. What they wouldn't see was the driver I'd already arranged to pick me up afterward, or the assistant waiting with documents that would turn their entire world upside down, or the meeting scheduled for the following week that would put my name in headlines across 3 continents. As I packed my small overnight bag, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. I looked exactly like what I was pretending to be: tired, uncertain, a little desperate. It was a good performance, honed by years of practice. But underneath the carefully constructed facade, I could feel something else building: a quiet confidence, a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with family brunch and everything to do with what came after. I was about to show them exactly who I really am. The train ride to Maine gave me 2 hours to practice being the person my family expected me to be. I slumped in my seat, stared out the window at passing towns, and perfected the art of looking slightly defeated by life. It's harder than you'd think, deliberately dimming yourself. When I finally walked up the circular driveway to Emery's estate, my legs were shaking from the 2-mile walk, and sweat had gathered under my arms despite the cool October air. Perfect. Nothing says struggling quite like arriving on foot to a house that probably cost more than most people make in a lifetime. The house itself was everything Emery had designed it to be, a testament to his success rendered in glass and steel, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the morning sun like mirrors, and a front lawn that looked like something out of a magazine spread. I could see figures moving around inside, elegant shadows preparing for another performance of family harmony. I stood at the front door for a moment, gathering myself. This was always the hardest part, the transition from who I really am to who they need me to be. It's like putting on a costume that's deliberately too small. Community. The door opened before I could knock, revealing my cousin Noelle in what I immediately recognized as a $5,000 dress. She looked me up and down with the kind of quick assessment that rich people have perfected, cataloging my thrift store jeans and canvas sneakers in a single glance. "Oh," she said, surprise flickering across her face. "Hey, Sarah." "I didn't hear a car. I took the train," I replied, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Thought I'd walk from the station. Such a beautiful day." The look she gave me suggested that walking anywhere was a concept she hadn't considered since childhood. "Well, come in. Everyone's already here." The interior was exactly what I'd expected, all open spaces and expensive art, furniture that looked beautiful but uncomfortable, the kind of place where you're afraid to touch anything because it probably costs more than a car. Voices drifted from what I assumed was the dining room, punctuated by the particular kind of laughter that comes from people who've never had to worry about money. I followed Noelle through a hallway lined with photographs of Emery's achievements, Harvard graduation, wedding photos, pictures from exotic vacations, his whole life displayed like a museum exhibit dedicated to success. The dining room opened into a space that could have housed a small family comfortably. The table was set for 12, covered with food that looked more like art installations than anything meant to be eaten, crystal glasses catching the light streaming through windows that offered a view of gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. My mother saw me first, her face lit up with a complicated expression she always wore when I arrived anywhere, relief mixed with apprehension, love tinged with worry. She hurried over, her heels clicking against marble floors. "Sarah, sweetheart, you made it." She kissed my cheek, and I caught a whiff of the expensive perfume she'd worn for as long as I could remember. "How was the trip? Any trouble finding the place?" "None at all," I said, accepting the mimosa someone pressed into my hand. "The train was actually pretty relaxing." I could feel eyes on me as I said it. In this family, taking public transportation was like admitting you couldn't afford a car, which, in their minds, I couldn't. The irony was that I owned 3 cars, including one that cost more than some people's houses. Emery materialized beside me with the kind of presence that demanded attention. He was wearing what I recognized as a casual outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, perfectly fitted chinos and a sweater that looked simple but bore the subtle hallmarks of serious money. "Little sister," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a photo opportunity than genuine affection. "Look at you, still living that minimalist lifestyle, I see." I forced a laugh. "You know me, I like to keep things simple." "Simple is one word for it," he said, and I caught the edge in his voice that had been there since we were children. He glanced at my clothes again, the question hanging in the air like smoke, and I felt the familiar weight of everyone's attention settling on me. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for, the annual check-in on poor Sarah's continuing failure to meet family expectations. "Actually, it's a 1-bedroom now," I said, taking a sip of my mimosa to buy time. I splurged a little. Emery's wife, Caroline, joined our little circle with a predatory smile she reserved for family gatherings. "That's wonderful, Sarah. Location is everything in real estate." "Oh, it's nothing fancy," I said quickly. "Just a little place in the arts district, close to coffee shops and bookstores." I could see them processing this information, fitting it into their understanding of my life. Arts district meant bohemian, coffee shops meant cheap, bookstores meant intellectual pretensions without the income to back them up. I was checking all the boxes perfectly. The conversation moved on to safer topics: the weather, the food, holiday plans. I found myself falling into the familiar rhythm of family gatherings, nodding at the right moments, laughing at jokes that weren't particularly funny, contributing just enough to avoid seeming antisocial. My teenage nephew Rowan was documenting everything with his phone, capturing moments for his TikTok followers with a casual narcissism that seemed to define his generation. At one point he pointed the camera at me and said, "This is my Aunt Sarah. She's, like, super minimalist." Not by choice, though. The comment hit harder than it should have, maybe because there was truth buried in the cruelty. I had chosen this life, but not for the reasons he thought. I'd chosen invisibility over scrutiny, simplicity over complexity. "Rowan," my mother said sharply, but the damage was done. The kid had said what everyone was thinking. I managed to smile. "It's fine, Mom. He's not wrong. I am pretty minimal these days." The brunch continued around me while I retreated into the careful performance I'd perfected over years of family gatherings. I listened to stories about yacht trips and ski vacations, about wine collections and art acquisitions, about the kind of problems that only existed when you had too much money rather than too little. My cousin Marcus, who worked in finance, regaled the table with stories about his latest deals, throwing around numbers that would have impressed me once upon a time. Now they just sounded small. "You should think about investing, Sarah," he said at one point. "Even small amounts can add up over time. I could help you set up a portfolio." "That's really generous," I replied. "I'll think about it. Right now I'm just focused on keeping my head above water." The pity in his eyes was almost tangible. Poor Sarah, still drowning while the rest of them swam in luxury. If only he knew that my investment portfolio was probably worth more than his annual salary. Aunt Sylvie, who had the peculiar gift of asking exactly the wrong question at exactly the wrong time, leaned across the table with the intensity of someone about to deliver helpful advice. "Sarah, dear, have you thought about settling down? You're not getting any younger, and there's something to be said for financial security that comes with the right partner." The suggestion that I needed a man to rescue me from my apparent poverty was so absurd that I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. "Oh, I'm pretty happy being single right now. My only companion is a bonsai tree, and it's very low maintenance." This got a polite chuckle from the table, but I could see the concern in my mother's eyes. In her world, a woman my age without a husband was either tragically unlucky or fundamentally flawed. The conversation drifted toward business, as it always did in my family. Money might be crass to discuss directly, but business was fair game. Emery held court with stories about his latest acquisitions, his voice carrying the particular confidence that comes from never having failed at anything important. I was half listening, playing my part as the admiring younger sister, when I heard a name that made my blood freeze. "Have you heard of this Reza Blackwood guy?" one of Emery's friends was saying. "He's been making waves in the startup scene. Brilliant programmer, apparently built some revolutionary accessibility app in college." My fingers tightened around my mimosa glass. Of all the conversations in all the brunches, they had to bring up Reza. "I've heard the name," Emery said, leaning forward with interest. "Didn't he just close some massive funding round?" 200 million, the friend confirmed. "Makes you wonder what the rest of us were doing with our 20s. I kept my face carefully neutral, but inside I was screaming. They were talking about my work, my innovation, my sleepless nights and breakthrough moments, all credited to the man who had stolen everything. The irony was almost too perfect. Here they were, my family who saw me as a failure, literally discussing the theft of my greatest success. If I told them the truth right now, that Reza Blackwood had built his empire on technology one had created, they wouldn't believe me. As the morning wore on, the subtle digs continued, comments about my appearance, my living situation, my mysterious career that nobody could quite pin down. Each one was delivered with a smile, wrapped in concern, but they accumulated like paper cuts. Emery cornered me near the windows overlooking his perfectly manicured garden, his expression carrying the particular mix of condescension and genuine worry that he'd perfected over the years. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. He lowered his voice as if we were discussing something scandalous. Are you doing okay financially? I mean, because if you need help with rent or bills or anything, you just have to ask. We're family. The offer was genuine, which somehow made it worse. He really believed that I was one missed paycheck away from disaster, that my little life was held together with duct tape and good intentions. I'm fine, Emery. Really, I managed what I hoped was a grateful smile. I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll manage. He studied my face for a moment, probably looking for signs of pride getting in the way of practicality. You sure? Because there's no shame in accepting help when you need it. I'm sure, I said. But thank you. It means a lot to know you're looking out for me. He nodded, apparently satisfied that he'd done his brotherly duty. As he walked away to rejoin his friends, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked exactly like the person they all thought I was, a little lost, a little tired, a little desperate to fit in somewhere. But underneath that carefully constructed surface, I could feel something else building, a quiet anticipation, a sense that this performance was almost over. The question wasn't whether I was ready for that revelation. The question was whether they were ready for the truth. The memories hit me hardest when I wasn't expecting them. Sitting in Emery's garden that afternoon, watching his perfect lawn stretch toward the horizon, I found myself back in a cramped dorm room 8 years ago when everything felt possible and nothing felt certain. Reza and I had been inseparable then, not just partners in the business sense, but in every way that mattered. We stayed up until dawn writing code, surviving on coffee and the kind of desperate energy that comes from believing you're about to change the world. We were building something beautiful, an accessibility app that would help visually impaired users navigate digital spaces in ways that had never been possible before. I was the one who came up with the core concept. I'd been tutoring a blind student in my computer science class, watching her struggle with existing screen readers that felt clunky and outdated. There had to be a better way, I thought, something elegant and intuitive, something that didn't make users feel like they were settling for a lesser experience. The breakthrough came during finals week of our junior year. I'd been working on the algorithm for 48 hours straight, running on fumes and determination, when suddenly all the pieces clicked into place. The code was beautiful, clean, efficient, and revolutionary in ways that would transform how millions of people interacted with technology. Reza found me passed out over my laptop at 6 in the morning, the completed program running on my screen like a miracle made of ones and zeros. When I woke up and showed him what I'd built, he actually cried, not from relief or exhaustion, but from pure joy at seeing something impossible become real. Sarah, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, this is going to change everything. We were both right and wrong about that. For 6 months we worked together to refine the technology, to build it into something marketable. We talked about the future, our company, our shared vision, our plans to make accessibility technology that didn't feel like charity but like innovation. We were going to call it Lighthouse Labs because we wanted to guide people towards something better. I trusted him completely, more than trusted him, I loved him in the complicated way you love someone who shares your deepest dreams and your most ambitious fears. We were partners in every sense of the word, building something that felt bigger than either of us could have accomplished alone. And then one day he was gone. Not dramatically, not with a fight or an explanation or even a proper goodbye, he just stopped returning my calls, stopped showing up to our planning meetings, stopped responding to emails about investor presentations we'd scheduled together. For 3 weeks I told myself he was going through something personal, that he'd come back when he was ready to talk. Then I saw the TechCrunch article, Revolutionary Accessibility App Launches from Harvard Dropout's Garage Startup. The accompanying photo showed Reza standing in front of a computer screen displaying my code, our code, with a smile that suggested he'd built everything himself. The article mentioned a small team of developers but never used my name. In the official narrative of his success, I had been erased as completely as if I never existed. The app was called Beacon, not Lighthouse, close enough to our original concept to feel like a taunt, different enough to avoid obvious plagiarism. The core technology was identical to what I developed, with minor modifications that any competent programmer could have made in a weekend. I spent the next 6 months in legal limbo, fighting a battle that felt hopeless from the start. Reza had money, family money, investor money, the kind of resources that could buy the best lawyers and the most convincing narratives. I had my original code, my development notes, and a handful of emails that proved I'd been the primary architect of the technology he'd stolen. The lawsuit was ugly and expensive and emotionally devastating. My parents didn't understand why I was pursuing it. They saw it as a business disagreement between young people who'd gotten in over their heads. Emery suggested I should be grateful for the experience and move on to something more practical. But I had help from an unexpected source. Professor Martinez from the computer science department had been following our work and recognized my code in Reza's product. She testified on my behalf, bringing credibility to my claims that money couldn't buy. Her testimony, combined with the digital paper trail I'd meticulously maintained, finally convinced a judge that intellectual property theft had occurred. The settlement was quiet but substantial. Reza's lawyers wanted to avoid a public trial that would expose the theft, so they offered me enough money to disappear and sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. I took it, not because I wanted to hide, but because I had bigger plans for that money than revenge. With the settlement funds, I disappeared from the public tech scene and started building something new under a carefully constructed pseudonym. While Reza enjoyed the spotlight and the accolades for technology he'd stolen, I was quietly developing something even more revolutionary, a data security platform that would make his accessibility app look like a toy. I called the company Valet Technologies, and I built it from the shadows: anonymous ownership, shell companies, a public face provided by actors I hired to play the role of CEO at conferences. The real decisions, the real innovations, the real power, all of that remained hidden behind layers of legal protection that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to connect Sarah Thompson, family disappointment, with the genius behind one of the most valuable tech companies in the world. The irony was perfect. While my family worried about my finances and my future, I was quietly building an empire worth more than all their combined assets. While they saw me as the one who couldn't quite get her life together, I was revolutionizing industries and reshaping the technological landscape. But success in secret is a lonely kind of victory. There were nights when I wanted nothing more than to call my mother and tell her what I'd accomplished, to see the pride in her eyes when she realized her supposedly struggling daughter was actually one of the most successful entrepreneurs of her generation. The hardest part wasn't the secrecy itself, it was watching them worry about me. My mother's concerned phone calls asking if I was eating enough and whether I needed help with bills, Emery's periodic offers of financial assistance delivered with the gentle condescension of someone who believed he was helping a sibling in need. They meant well, which somehow made it worse. Their concern came from love, even if it was wrapped in assumptions that couldn't have been more wrong. They wanted to help me succeed, not knowing that I had already succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. That night, as the brunch finally wound down and family members began making their excuses to leave, my mother found me sitting alone on Emery's back patio. The sun was setting over his manicured gardens, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "Sarah," she said, settling into the chair beside me with the careful grace of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of appearing effortless. "I want to talk to you about something." I knew what was coming before she opened her mouth. The same conversation we'd been having in various forms for the past 5 years, ever since I'd graduated college and failed to immediately transform into the kind of success story she could brag about at bridge club. "I'm worried about you, sweetheart." Her voice carried the particular tone mothers use when they're trying to solve problems they don't fully understand. "You seem lost, uncertain about your direction." "Mom, really, are you though?" She turned to face me, and I could see genuine concern in her eyes. "Because from where I'm sitting it looks like you're struggling, and there's no shame in that. Everyone struggles sometimes. But there's also no shame in accepting help when you need it." The urge to tell her everything was almost overwhelming, to explain that I wasn't struggling, that I was actually more successful than anyone in the family had ever dreamed of being, that the modest apartment and careful spending weren't signs of poverty but of choice. Instead, I just smiled and squeezed her hand. "I'm figuring it out, Mom. I promise." The disappointment in her eyes was almost physical. She wanted me to confide in her, to admit that I needed help, to let her play the role of the wise mother guiding her lost daughter back to the right path. "You know, your father would have been proud of you no matter what," she said finally. He always said you had the biggest heart in the family. Sometimes that's more important than conventional success. Biggest heart, code for lax ambition. My father had been gone for 3 years now, and I missed him every day. He'd been the one member of the family who never seemed disappointed in my choices, who never pushed me to be something other than what I was. That evening, after most of the family had left, I overheard Emery talking to his business partner about a potential investment opportunity. They were discussing Valet Technologies, my company, and debating whether it was worth the risk of putting money into a firm with such mysterious leadership. The returns are incredible, Emery was saying, but nobody knows who's really running the company. Could be a scam for all we know. The technology is solid, his partner replied. Whatever else you can say about them, they're producing results. Revolutionary stuff. I sat in the shadows of the hallway listening to my brother unknowingly discuss my life's work. The temptation to walk into that room and reveal everything was almost irresistible. To see the shock on his face when he realized that his struggling little sister was the anonymous genius behind the technology he was considering investing in. But revelation has its own timeline, and mine wasn't quite ready yet. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. Are you sure you want the car to arrive out front tomorrow? We could arrange something more discreet. I typed back quickly, let's give them a show. Because tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow the careful performance I'd maintained for 5 years would finally come to an end. Tomorrow they would see exactly who I really am. The only question was whether they'd be ready for the truth. The final morning of the brunch dawned crisp and clear, with a kind of perfect autumn light that makes everything look like it belongs in a magazine. I sat in Emery's guest room, sipping coffee from a mug that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, and watched my family through the window as they gathered on the terrace below. They moved with the casual confidence of people who had never questioned their place in the world, Emery gesturing expansively as he told some story, Caroline laughing at precisely the right moments, my cousins clustered around their phones like digital-age fortune tellers reading the signs of their own importance. In 2 hours everything would change. The careful performance I'd maintained for years would finally come to an end, and they would see exactly who I really am. The anticipation was almost physical, like electricity running just beneath my skin. I was putting on the same modest outfit I'd worn yesterday, maintaining the illusion until the very last moment, when I heard car doors slamming in the driveway. Through the window I watched a black sedan pull up to the house, and my stomach dropped as I recognized the figure stepping out. Reza Blackwood looked exactly like the successful tech mogul he'd become on the foundation of my stolen work. Perfectly tailored casual wear, the kind of confident posture that comes from never having to worry about money, and a smile that had probably graced a dozen magazine covers. He was here at my family's brunch, and there could only be one reason why, Emery. I could see them greeting each other like old friends, which meant my brother had been cultivating this relationship for a while. Probably saw Reza as a potential investor or business partner, never knowing that he was bringing my past directly into collision with my present. By the time I made it downstairs, Reza was already holding court in the living room, regaling my family with stories about the tech industry that made him sound like a visionary rather than a thief. He looked up when I entered the room, and for just a moment his carefully constructed composure cracked. Sarah, his voice carried genuine shock, as if seeing me here had short-circuited his ability to process reality. I had no idea you'd be here. Small world, I replied, accepting the mimosa my mother pressed into my hand, though I suppose not that small considering you've been messaging me on LinkedIn. Emery looked between us with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. You two know each other? We went to college together, I said before Reza could answer. Ancient history. But Reza wasn't ready to let it go that easily. Actually, Sarah and I were business partners for a while. We worked on a project together. The way he said it, casual, dismissive, as if our partnership had been some minor college experiment rather than the foundation of his entire empire, made my hands clench around my glass. He was rewriting history in real time, turning the theft of my life's work into a footnote in his success story. That's fascinating, Caroline said with the polite interest of someone who didn't actually find it fascinating at all. What kind of project? Oh, just some app development, Reza replied with a wave of his hand. Student stuff. You know how it is. Nothing too serious. Nothing too serious, the technology that had made him worth hundreds of millions of dollars, that had revolutionized accessibility for millions of users, that had launched his career into the stratosphere. Sarah's always been very creative, my mother added in the tone she used when she wanted to say something nice but couldn't quite manage enthusiastic. I watched Reza work the room, charming my family with the same ease he'd probably used on investors and journalists. He told stories about his latest ventures, name-dropped tech luminaries like they were personal friends, and painted himself as the kind of visionary entrepreneur that people like my family loved to orbit around. After about 20 minutes of watching him perform, I couldn't take it anymore. I caught his eye and nodded toward the garden. Reza, could I talk to you for a minute? Privately. We walked out onto the terrace in silence, the morning air sharp enough to make our breath visible. In the distance I could see the perfectly manicured ground stretching toward the water, every tree and hedge precisely placed to create maximum visual impact. I owe you an explanation, he said before I could speak. You owe me a lot more than that. He had the grace to look ashamed, at least a little. Sarah, I know what I did was wrong. I've regretted it every day since. Have you? I kept my voice level, conversational, because it seems like you've done pretty well for yourself on the foundation of that regret. The money isn't the point, I finished, though I'm sure you tell yourself it is. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the water like it might provide answers to questions he'd been avoiding for years. I tried to contact you after the settlement to apologize, to explain, to what? To justify stealing my work and erasing my contribution? To explain why you decided that your name looked better on my innovation than mine did? It wasn't supposed to happen like that. His voice carried the particular kind of desperation that comes from trying to convince yourself as much as the person you're talking to. Things just spiraled. The investors wanted a single point of contact, a clear narrative. It was easier to simplify the story. Easier to erase me. You mean, I never meant to hurt you? I almost laughed at that. Reza, you didn't just hurt me. You stole 5 years of my life. You took credit for something that came from my mind, my sleepless nights, my breakthrough moments. You built an empire on technology one created and then acted like I never existed. I know, he said quietly. And I've wanted to make it right ever since. Really? Because from where I'm standing it looks like you've spent the last 5 years enjoying the fruits of my labor while I've been, what did you call it in there? Being creative. Before he could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my assistant's name, and I realized that this was it, the moment I'd been building toward for months. Excuse me, I said to Reza, then answered the call with the volume just loud enough for him to hear every word. Miss Morgan, my assistant's voice came through clearly, using the pseudonym I'd operated under for years. Your driver is outside with the Lamborghini. Should he wait, or would you prefer to take the helicopter to the investor meeting? The effect was immediate and devastating. Reza's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, recognition, and finally something that might have been terror, because he had just heard my assistant use the name that had been attached to some of the most significant tech innovations of the past 5 years. The car is fine, I replied calmly. Tell Thompson I'll see him at 3 for the presentation. I hung up and looked at Reza, whose complexion had gone approximately the color of old newspaper. You were saying something about making things right. You're S. Morgan, he whispered. You're the founder of Valet Technologies. Among other things, yes. But that's impossible. He gestured helplessly at my modest clothes, my deliberate ordinariness. You live in a studio apartment. You take the train. I choose to live simply, I corrected. There's a difference between can't afford and don't need. The sound of voices drifted from inside the house, my family continuing their conversations, completely unaware that their understanding of reality was about to be turned upside down. In a few minutes I would walk back in there and reveal exactly who I really am. But first I had something to say to the man who had started this whole journey. You asked me on LinkedIn if I wanted to catch up, I said. Here's your chance. What exactly did you want to tell me? I wanted to offer you a position, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. At my company. A partnership, actually. I thought you could hire me to work on technology one invented. You thought you could offer me a partnership in a company built on my stolen work? I shook my head, genuinely amazed by the audacity. That's either incredibly arrogant or incredibly stupid. I thought you needed, what? Money? Purpose? The chance to be junior partner in my own innovation? I stepped closer and he actually took a step back. Reza, I built an empire while you've been playing with the toys I left behind. What exactly do you think you could offer me? Before he could answer, the sound of an engine pulled our attention toward the driveway. A pearl-white Lamborghini was gliding up the circular drive like something from a fever dream, followed by a black sedan that probably contained enough security to protect a small country. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows I could see my family freeze like deer in headlights. Emery dropped his coffee cup, sending expensive porcelain shattering across marble floors. Caroline's mouth fell open so wide I could have parked a truck in it. Even Rowan stopped filming himself long enough to stare at the automotive equivalent of a meteor landing in their perfectly ordered world. The valet stepped out of the Lamborghini with the kind of professional grace that comes from years of handling vehicles worth more than most people's houses. He was followed by my assistant, a crisp, professional woman in a perfectly tailored suit who moved like she owned the world and was considering whether to keep it. That's mine, I said to Reza, watching his face cycle through approximately 17 different emotions in a span of 3 seconds. Just something I keep for fun. I walked toward the house, leaving him standing alone on the terrace looking like someone had just explained quantum physics to him in ancient Greek. Through the windows I could see my family crowding around the glass, staring at the scene unfolding in their driveway like it was performance art they didn't quite understand. The moment I stepped through the French doors, every conversation stopped. The silence was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, marking time in a world that had just shifted on its axis. Sarah, Emery said, his voice carrying the particular strain that comes from trying to process information that doesn't fit any existing category. There's a Lamborghini in my driveway. I noticed, I replied, accepting the tablet my assistant handed me with the same casual grace I'd used to accept a cup of coffee. Is it yours? The question came from Caroline, delivered in the tone someone might use to ask if I'd recently discovered I was actually an alien. Among other things, yes. My assistant stepped forward with a kind of professional efficiency that suggested she'd handled stranger situations than this. Miss Morgan, the Thompson meeting has been confirmed for 3 o'clock. Should I have the jet prepared for the West Coast trip afterward? The effect of hearing my business name spoken aloud in my family's living room was like dropping a bomb in a library. Absolute silence followed by the kind of confused noise that comes from multiple people trying to speak at once. Miss Morgan, my mother's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah, what is she talking about? Emery was staring at me like I'd just performed an actual magic trick, transforming from his struggling little sister into someone he didn't recognize. Sarah Morgan, you're Sarah Morgan. You're the founder of Valet Technologies. Among other things, I repeated, beginning to enjoy the repetition. But that's impossible, he said, and I could see his brain working frantically to reconcile the person he'd known his entire life with the reality standing in front of him. Sarah Morgan is worth more than everyone in this room combined. Yes, I finished. I'm aware. The questions came all at once then, a flood of confusion and disbelief and something that might have been awe. How long had I been hiding this? Why hadn't I told them? Was this some kind of elaborate joke? I held up a hand and the room fell silent again, amazing how money changes the way people listen to you. I've been building this for 5 years, I said. Since college, actually, since someone I trusted decided that my work looked better with his name on it. I glanced toward the terrace where Reza was still standing like a statue, probably contemplating the various ways his life had just imploded. You've had money this whole time? The question came from Rowan, delivered with the kind of teenage directness that cuts through adult politeness like a knife. And you just let us think you were poor. I let you think what you wanted to think, I corrected. I never lied about anything. I just didn't correct your assumptions. But why? My mother's voice carried genuine pain, the hurt of someone who'd spent years worrying unnecessarily. Why would you let us worry about you? It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. Because, I said, looking around the room at faces that had spent years seeing me as a failure, you only listen when there's a luxury car involved. The silence that followed my revelation lasted exactly long enough for reality to settle into their minds like sediment in still water. Then the dam burst and suddenly everyone was talking at once, voices overlapping in a symphony of confusion and recalibration. Noelle was the first to break free from the crowd, following me out onto the terrace where I'd gone to escape the chaos. Her designer heels clicked against the stone like a metronome keeping time with her racing thoughts. Sarah, she said, and I could hear something new in her voice, not the polite dismissal I'd grown used to, but genuine respect tinged with desperation. I need to ask you something. I turned to face her, noting how different she looked now that the power dynamic had shifted, less certain, more vulnerable, like someone who'd just realized they'd been playing by the wrong rules their entire life. I want out, she said simply. Out of this family's expectations, out of the toxic competition, out of the whole performance. I've been in therapy for 3 years trying to figure out how to be my own person instead of just another pretty accessory in the family collection. She gestured toward the house where I could see my relatives through the windows, still clustered around the Lamborghini like pilgrims at a shrine. You figured out how to build something real while the rest of us were just maintaining appearances. Would you consider mentoring me, teaching me how to actually succeed instead of just looking successful? The request caught me off guard. Of all the reactions I'd anticipated, genuine vulnerability hadn't been high on the list. What would you want to do? I have a business degree I've never used because everyone assumed I'd just marry well and manage charity events, she said, her words coming faster now like she was afraid I'd change my mind if she didn't get it all out quickly. But I have ideas, real ideas about sustainable fashion, about changing how the industry works. I just need someone who knows how to turn ideas into reality. I studied her face, looking for signs of the superficiality that had defined our relationship for years. Instead, I saw something I'd never noticed before: intelligence that had been carefully hidden beneath layers of social conditioning, ambition that had been channeled into acceptable feminine pursuits rather than genuine achievement. Send me a business plan, I said finally. A real one, with numbers and research and actual market analysis. If it's good, we'll talk. The relief in her eyes was almost physical. Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. As she walked back toward the house, my mother appeared in the doorway. She moved slowly, like someone navigating unfamiliar terrain, and when she reached me her eyes were red-rimmed with tears I wasn't sure how to interpret. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. A huge one. Mom, no, let me say this. She took a shaky breath, composing herself with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent decades managing her emotions in public. I failed you. I spent so many years worrying about you, trying to fix problems that didn't exist, that I never stopped to consider that maybe you didn't need fixing. The pain in her voice was genuine, and it hit harder than any of the subtle dismissals I'd endured over the years. You didn't fail me. I did, though. I looked at my brilliant, successful daughter and saw only what she wasn't instead of what she was. I worried about your finances while you were building an empire. I fretted about your future while you were revolutionizing entire industries. She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. I never believed you'd amount to anything significant, and you became more significant than I ever dreamed possible. The admission hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure either of us knew how to cross. I never stopped loving you, I said finally. Even when the assumptions hurt, even when the pity felt like acid, I knew it came from a place of caring. But you must have felt so alone, she whispered, carrying all of this success by yourself, watching us treat you like a charity case when you could have bought and sold all of us. Sometimes, I admitted, but there was also power in being underestimated. Freedom in being invisible. When people don't expect anything from you, every victory feels bigger. She nodded slowly, processing this information like someone learning a new language. Will you forgive me for not seeing you clearly? There's nothing to forgive, Mom. You saw what I wanted you to see. As we stood there trying to rebuild a relationship on the foundation of truth instead of assumption, Reza finally worked up the courage to approach us. He looked like someone who'd spent the last hour reconsidering every major decision of his adult life. Sarah, he said, his voice carefully controlled. I need to say something. My mother looked between us, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. I'll leave you two alone, she said, squeezing my hand before heading back inside. Reza waited until she was gone before continuing. I want to make this right. Whatever it takes. You can't, I said simply. What's done is done. You stole my work, built your empire on my innovation, and spent 5 years enjoying success that should have been mine. There's no undoing that. I could give you credit, he said desperately, publicly, a press conference, interviews, whatever you want. I could tell the whole world that the technology was yours. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Reza, I don't need your credit anymore. I built something bigger than your little accessibility app. I've revolutionized data security, transformed how corporations protect their information, created technology that makes what you stole look like a toy from the Stone Age. Then what do you want? Money? Equity in my company? Just tell me what it would take. I want you to live with what you did, I said quietly. I want you to wake up every morning knowing that your success is built on stolen ground. I want you to sign every contract and give every interview with the knowledge that you're a fraud who got lucky. The cruelty of it seemed to hit him like a physical blow. Sarah, but more than that, I continued, I want you to be better. I want you to build something real, something that comes from your own mind instead of someone else's work. I want you to prove that there's more to you than theft and opportunism. Before he could respond, the sound of commotion from inside the house drew our attention. Through the windows I could see Emery gesticulating wildly while talking on his phone, his face cycling through emotions like a slot machine paying out in chaos. What's happening? Reza asked. Reality, I replied. My brother's probably just realizing that his struggling little sister could buy his company without checking her bank balance. As if summoned by our conversation, Emery burst through the French doors with a kind of manic energy that comes from having your entire worldview restructured in real time. Sarah, he said, his voice carrying a pitch I'd never heard before. We need to talk about business, about investments, about how you've been offering to help with my rent while I could afford to buy your house in cash. I suggested. The color drained from his face. I didn't know. No, you didn't. And that's the problem. I looked at this man who'd spent our entire lives treating me like a disappointment, who'd offered me financial help out of pity rather than respect. Emery, your firm is under investigation for securities fraud. Your clients are fleeing. Your reputation is hanging by a thread. And you want to talk to me about business. The shock in his eyes told me he'd thought that information was still secret. How did you? I know things, Emery. I know your firm has been cooking the books for 3 years. I know the SEC is building a case against you. I know your biggest clients are preparing to sue you for misrepresentation. I stepped closer and he actually took a step back. I also know that in about 6 months you're going to lose everything you've spent your career building. You could help me, he said, and the desperation in his voice was almost pathetic. A loan, an investment, something to keep the firm afloat until what? Until you figure out how to commit fraud more effectively? I made mistakes, you made choices, I corrected. The same way you chose to see me as a failure for 32 years. The same way you chose to offer me charity instead of respect. The same way you chose to measure my worth by your standards instead of my own. I turned away from him, looking out at the perfect lawn that probably cost more to maintain than most people made in a year. I built my empire in silence, Emery, while you were making noise about your success. I was actually achieving it. While you were treating me like a charity case, I was becoming one of the most powerful people in an industry you don't even understand. Sarah, please, the answer is no, I said without turning around. No loans, no investments, no bailout. You built your house of cards, and now you get to watch it fall. The sound of his footsteps retreating into the house was followed by a crash that suggested he'd kicked something expensive. In the distance I could hear raised voices as my family processed the new information about their golden boy's impending downfall. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant, "The jet is ready when you are." Thompson's people confirmed for 3 o'clock. I typed back, "On my way." Because this performance was finally over. I'd shown them exactly who I really am, and now it was time to return to the life I'd actually built instead of the one they'd imagined for me. 1 year later I declined their invitation. The message came through my assistant, formal and polite, requesting the honor of my presence at the annual family brunch. I read it while sitting in my actual apartment, still modest by choice, still simply furnished, still the kind of place that would make my family worry about my finances if they saw it. "Send my regrets," I told my assistant. Previous engagement. The previous engagement was a walk along the coast, just me and the morning sun and the kind of peace that comes from no longer needing anyone's approval. It had taken me 33 years to learn that the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to play games you were never meant to win. My life had taken on a different rhythm since the revelation. The constant performance was over, replaced by something quieter but infinitely more satisfying. I still ran Valet Technologies from the shadows, still made decisions that affected millions of users and billions of dollars. But now I also had something I'd never allowed myself before: genuine relationships built on truth instead of pretense. Noelle had become a real friend, not just a cousin I tolerated at family gatherings. Her sustainable fashion startup was thriving, funded by my investment but driven by her vision and determination. She'd found her voice, and it turned out to be stronger and more innovative than anyone had imagined. "You saved my life," she told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings. "Not financially, though that helped, but you showed me it was possible to be successful without sacrificing my soul to family expectations." The philanthropic arm of my company had grown into something beautiful and unexpected. We funded women in tech, provided resources for students from underrepresented backgrounds, and created opportunities for people who'd been written off by systems that valued appearance over ability. Every grant we awarded, every program we launched, felt like a small victory against the forces that had tried to diminish me. A letter arrived one Tuesday from a 12-year-old girl in Detroit whose coding camp we'd sponsored. Her handwriting was careful and precise, each letter formed with the concentration of someone who had important things to say. "Dear Mystery Lady," it began. "My teacher says you're the person who paid for our computer class. I wanted to say thank you and also that I want to be like you when I grow up, mysterious and powerful and helping people even when they don't know it. I'm going to build something amazing and maybe nobody will see it coming either." I read that letter 17 times before carefully filing it away with the other treasures I'd accumulated over the years, evidence that power used quietly could still change the world, that influence exercised from the shadows could still create light. My mother's visits were regular now. Our relationship rebuilt on the foundation of honesty rather than assumption. She never quite got used to the disconnect between my modest lifestyle and my vast resources, but she'd stopped trying to fix problems that didn't exist. "I still don't understand why you live like this," she said during one visit, gesturing at my simple furniture and bare walls. "You could have anything." "I do have anything," I replied. "I just don't need everything." She was learning to see me clearly for the first time in our lives, and the experience was transforming both of us. The worried phone call stopped. The unsolicited advice disappeared. In their place was something I'd never expected: genuine respect. The museum wing opened on a Thursday in spring, dedicated to my father's memory and designed to inspire the next generation of innovators. The plaque by the entrance read Harrison Thompson Memorial Innovation Center, and underneath in smaller letters, "For children who dream in code and think in possibilities." I attended the opening ceremony anonymously, just another face in the crowd watching young visitors explore interactive exhibits designed to make technology feel accessible and exciting. A group of elementary school students clustered around a coding station, their faces lit up with the kind of wonder that comes from seeing impossible things become real. "This is so cool," one of them whispered to her friend. "Do you think whoever built this place was like us when they were little?" "Probably," her friend replied with the confidence of someone who had never been told her dreams were too big. "They just figured out how to make their ideas real." I smiled and slipped away before anyone could recognize me. Some victories are best savored in solitude. Ray's story played out exactly as I'd predicted. A TechCrunch article 6 months after our confrontation contained a single paragraph that caught my attention. Blackwood Industries founder Reza Blackwood acknowledges that his early success was built on collaborative work with partners who didn't receive proper recognition. "I've spent years trying to make amends for mistakes I made when I was young and ambitious," Blackwood stated. Success means nothing if it's built on someone else's foundation. It wasn't an admission of theft, but it was closer to the truth than he'd ever come before. I felt no satisfaction in reading it, just a quiet sense of closure. Some chapters end not with triumph but with understanding. Emery's fall was swift and decisive. The securities fraud investigation concluded with criminal charges, and his firm collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. He lost his licenses, his clients, and most of his personal wealth in a cascade of legal fees and civil settlements. I heard about it through Noelle, who'd maintained some contact with that side of the family despite her own transformation. "He's working for a small accounting firm now," she told me over coffee, making maybe a tenth of what he used to make. "Mom says he's finally learning humility." I felt no joy in his downfall, just a sense of cosmic justice finally finding its target. Some people need to lose everything before they can learn what actually matters. The ocean was calm the morning I walked along the shore, thinking about the girl I'd been at that first brunch after college, uncertain, defensive, desperate to prove herself worthy of approval she'd never needed in the first place. That girl had built an empire to show them all how wrong they'd been about her. This woman had built something better, a life that didn't require anyone else's validation. My phone buzzed with a message from my assistant about a board meeting, a decision that needed my input on technology that would reshape how the world handled digital privacy, important work, meaningful work, the kind of problems that mattered beyond family dynamics and personal vendettas. But for now I just walked. The waves rolled in with mathematical precision, following laws older than ambition, older than pride, older than the need to prove anything to anyone. The sun painted everything in shades of gold and possibility, and for the first time in my adult life I felt completely at peace with being exactly who I was. They'd laughed at my apartment, dismissed my choices, measured my worth by their standards, and found me wanting. What they'd never realized, what they could never have understood, was that I'd built my empire in silence, not to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that their opinions were irrelevant. In the end, that was the most powerful revelation of all. I didn't need their approval because I'd learned to approve of myself. The woman they'd never seen coming had arrived exactly where she belonged, free from their expectations, accountable only to her own conscience, powerful enough to change the world but wise enough to do it quietly. They'd finally learned who I really was. Now I was learning who I could become.